All right, welcome back, everyone. Or if this is your first time, welcome, welcome back. Good afternoon, good evening, good night, um, and good morning. So, thanks so much for joining us. We really do appreciate you joining us, you cyber travelers. This is Cyber Circuits with Project Spectrum. I'm your host, Rico. I also serve as a digital bodyguard and sort of semi-retired VHS rewinder. So today we're going to be talking about -4 to secure because let's face it, some of us who are starting our cybersecurity journey are not starting from zero. We're starting from yikes. So we're going to be talking about that today. Joining us today, the legendary Chris Barber. He is, this is the greatest title ever. He is chief nerd at Cheaper Than a Geek. And let me just say that this guy has probably forgotten more about IT than a lot of us probably ever knew. So he's going to be perfect. Chris, we're going to say a real quick hello.
Hey, hi everybody. How are you? It's good to be here.
Fantastic. And then we'll get into your introduction in just a little bit. So everybody, stay tuned. We've got an hour to go, and we're going to make it an hour full of some really great stuff. So just want to jump into the nice wonderful PowerPoint slides that my wonderful colleague Mark put together because I want to make sure that we're showing those. So again, we're going with -4 to secure. This is starting your cybersecurity journey. And just to give you again a little bit about us, Chris, like I said, is the founder, CEO, and chief nerd at Cheaper Than a Geek, an award-winning IT services firm known for delivering enterprise-level support to small businesses. He's got well over 2 decades of experience in the industry. He's built a reputation as a leader in providing innovative, customer-centric solutions that empower businesses to thrive in a digital world. Chris, was that about on point?
Yeah, I would totally agree with you, but I have to add in there, the nerd glasses for just a second and just remind everybody, we like to tell everyone with ears that we take the SH out of IT.
Loved to hear that. That's you've got that on your website, right? Please tell me you have that.
And the
Excellent.
cars and everywhere. Yep.
Fantastic. And then, of course, I'm your host, Rick, with the really long last name that nobody knows how to pronounce, but I always tell everybody it's pronounced however you want to say it. I'm the strategic communications lead for Move America. I work very closely with the Project Spectrum team and a lot of folks within industry, government, and academia. We're delivering that outreach to businesses and organizations that are looking to bolster their cybersecurity posture. And it is my pleasure to once again be a host of this fantastic webinar, although I really do need to update that picture. All right, so a couple of reminders. Just to let everybody know, you are on a recorded webinar session. We are in the state of Maryland, which is a two-party consent state. So I have to let you know that you're part of a part of a recorded webinar session. Your microphone is muted, your camera is off, and the only thing that people can really see probably is the name that you put on there. Now, some people put their actual names, and other people, have Beyonce fan 1234, or Chief Nerd, something like that, or Chris Unverified. So exactly. So again, that's really all that people can see. But because we're a two-party consent state, I do have to say you either have to be comfortable being part of a recorded webinar where, again, you're not going to get to say anything, you're not going to be on camera, but you're going to be able to ask questions in the chat. All of that's going to go into the transcript. If there's anybody who's uncomfortable being part of this session, you have my permission and my, highest esteem. You go ahead and leave now. We'll make sure that you get the recording of this later on, but have to give you the opportunity to jump off if you want to. And we're going to go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, everybody else is sticking around. We're glad to see that. So before we go any further, want to introduce Project Spectrum to everybody. Hopefully you know all about Project Spectrum, but to do that, we have the esteemed Kareem Sykes. And Kareem, thank you so much for joining us. We always love to have you on these. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the floor over to you so you could talk all about Project Spectrum.
Rick, thank you so much, and a very warm welcome to all of you who are joining us, hopefully from around the country, to really talk about Project Spectrum and and specifically -4 to secure, right? Starting your cybersecurity journey. So whether you're sort of just beginning your cyber readiness journey, as Rick alluded to there, or guiding others along the path, or maybe you're a little bit down the road, right? You've seen kind of the scare factor of what your score may have looked like at your first sort of baseline self-assessment, and you're like, you know what, I need help. Well, we're here to help you with that, and so I want to once again welcome you guys to this. Hopefully, will be a session that will provide some practical insights, some actionable steps, and strategic perspective, right, to really help small and medium-sized businesses like yourselves strengthen your cybersecurity posture, right? So we're especially excited, as Rick mentioned, to be joined by today's featured guest, Mr. Chris Barber, again, affectionately known as the Chief Nerd and founder of Chief Within a Geek. Hopefully you walk away. My hope today is that you walk away with the valuable takeaways around the top cybersecurity challenges facing small businesses. You know, what are some of the first steps that really matter when you're starting that cybersecurity journey? And then when and why to outsource IT and how to do it wisely. So some practical lessons from the front lines of managing IT infrastructure and the like. And so I want to just highlight that fairly recently here, we know that the final rule, for example, for CMMC was in fact submitted to OIRA, that is the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs within DoD annals. And so that is a pivotal, critical step for CMMC. So we're inching ever closer to the finalization of Title 48 of the Code of Federal Regulations, which, as you all are tracking, basically it shows us how it is that CMMC is going to start showing up into contracts. So again, a very important milestone. I just figured I'd mention that since that's very, very recent news. And again, it gives us yet another affirmation of sorts that in fact we are moving ever closer to CMMC being instantiated across the DoD as a whole. And so for any contracting opportunities there as well. But again, very excited to be here and happy that you all are joining us. Rick, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Kareem. We do appreciate that. And again, you know, as we are going through this webinar, we want you to make sure that you're comfortable with the information. We want to make sure that you're asking questions. You can do so in the chat. You can add stuff into the chat. Please, the only thing we ask is that you be respectful in the chat. So remember, we want to keep everybody on a level playing field. No self-promotion, please. The only one who should be self-promoting himself is our guest. You know, we're going to give him plenty of opportunity to do that. But everybody else, again, you know, if you disagree with somebody, please do so respectfully. Make sure we practice decorum at all times. And again, we're going to be recording this. We're going to be making sure that you're getting a link to the recording afterwards. And we're also going to send out a survey because we want to make sure that you give us some feedback. We really do need to know what we could do well or better, or what we need to change when it comes to these webinars. You know, and again, anything in that survey you want to say, that's all just, you know, it's either anonymous or, again, it's not broadcast to everybody. So that really is just sharing it with the Project Spectrum team. So with no further ado, we're going to jump into everything with Chris, who is our chief nerd and our guest today. So Chris, we really need you to set the scene for us. So I'm going to ask you point blank, what is the current state of cybersecurity for small and medium-sized businesses? Are we talking Nightmare on Elm Street? Are we talking Texas Chainsaw Massacre? Are we talking Scream, where it's kind of comical? I mean, you know, where are we at on this scale?
Fair enough. It's definitely in the neighborhood of Nightmare on Elm Street, unfortunately. You know, it's really like a mix of wake up call and wishful thinking. A lot of small businesses are honestly more connected than ever, you know, between cloud apps, remote workers, online payments, all that stuff. But a lot of these folks, perhaps inadvertently, are protecting them like it's 1990 something. So, you know, you got to figure that, you know, there's oftentimes a false sense of security around, oh, it's in the cloud or some derivative of that. But just because you can't touch a server with your hands doesn't mean you're any less vulnerable. Chances are you're probably more vulnerable. We see in the SMB space, you know, a lot of folks think that they're too small to be on the receiving end of an attack, but the reality is they're low hanging fruit because they're typically very unprotected. So they are actively being hunted by the bad folks that are around terrorizing us on the internet.
Yeah, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that the smaller businesses, especially those who are trying to get into either, you know, the federal supply chain or especially the defense supply chain, they're going to have that interconnectivity with those larger prime contractors. They're going to have the interconnectivity with the government systems. And so, I mean, it's kind of like, you know, leaving your front door open and hoping that the burglars are, you know, not coming to your neighborhood that day, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. You know, you wouldn't have a retail storefront where you leave the door unlocked and opened overnight, you know, and a lot of times our cybersecurity posture is unfortunately more like that, which is bad.
Yeah, and it all again has to do with a lot of stuff that, you know, there are people that look at it and again you can throw in those wonderful analogies about boiling oceans and eating elephants and pretty much anything else you want to talk about. But I mean, there's some of it that's just common sense or, you know, little steps that you could take that are eventually going to make them, you know, they're going to clump together into a bigger step and a bigger step that are going to get you on that path.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. It's really a ideal mix of you know, security. So think of it as defense, but then at the end of the day, you also have to have some sort of intelligence around data backups and protection. You know, and you got to do both of those things. If you're only doing half of the equation, you're only half protected, basically.
No, very true, very true. So, you know, when we came up with the title for this webinar, you know, we really hit upon this -4 to secure, right? And so in your viewpoint, what exactly are we seeing as far as people starting at -4? What exactly does that mean?
No, that's fair, and it is kind of a goofy, you know, way to categorize it, but there's a reason why we did this. So, you know, to be realistic, most small businesses aren't starting at zero when it comes to cybersecurity. They're really starting at -4, which is to say they've got outdated software, they've got weak passwords, they don't have MFA, they're not doing training. You know, most of the time, these small businesses, they don't know what they don't know, you know, therefore they're not doing what they need to do. And you're really kind of starting at a negative position because you got to dig out of that hole to actually be protected.
Yeah, and that's true. And I love when you say you don't know what you don't know because you don't realize how far behind you are until something breaks, right? Because I mean, particularly when you have businesses in the manufacturing sector, they're relying on a lot of automation these days. They're relying on computers that are probably, oh, for crying out loud, I won't even say they're running Windows XP. They're probably running Windows 98 in some instances. And they just don't realize how dangerous that is because those computers, while they're working now for the purpose that you need them to work for, you know, it's a big gaping hole, right?
Oh, it absolutely is. Yeah, it you know you could drive a tractor trailer through it. You know this -4 thing. It's really like a mindset. You know we gotta stop pretending like everything's fine and be honest with where we are. You know, and that's how you get to make you know smart, intelligent steps forward. I know CMMC, you know, is a four-letter word, if you will, to some people. But if you think about what it's for, it kind of makes sense. We all have to have decent security. We do. You know, IT is a funny thing. You can spend millions of dollars on your security. You know, there's really no limit to what you can spend. But just having common sense baseline security is something everybody should have. But most people Rick are not nerds, you know, so it's not that they don't want to, it's not that necessarily that they don't care, they just don't understand or they don't know. And if you've ever been on the receiving end of a bad experience or a car accident or somebody taking advantage of you, you know, you got to be proactively ready it's not enough to, fix it after the fact, if you will.
No, and that's true. And that's really where it comes in from a leadership and awareness standpoint. I mean, when it comes to a small business, a lot of things really do have to come from the top down. And you talk about CMMC, and again, it does seem daunting to somebody who isn't a nerd, to somebody who's just focused on running a business. But it is imperative to have that cybersecurity posture if you're going to start playing with the bigger boys, is we like to say, playing with the bigger kids. You want to make sure that you're not going to be that weak link in their supply chain as you're going out and you're trying to get federal contracts and you're trying to get in with prime contractors, the larger companies, they're not going to give you a second look if you are the one who's going to cause the entire thing to go south.
That's a true story. Yep. You got to have your ducks in a row because they need to be in a row, and nobody wants to be on the receiving end of an attack. But yeah, I mean, you're basically being mandated to do this, and you have to. You really do.
Yeah, and so again, it comes from that top-down standpoint, that mindset. And again, we understand the challenges that the small and medium businesses have. We understand that their resources are constrained because they're worried about production. They're not worried about cybersecurity, but it's no longer a nice to have. We can't term it that way.
No, not at all. It's mandatory. It always should have been, and it's literally becoming mandatory now.
And so when you're talking about taking a business that's at -4 and they want to start clawing their way back to 0 and then beyond, but without, of course, needing a PhD in firewalls, I mean, are there some really practical steps? I know you were talking about them before, about things that businesses are missing. So can we talk a little bit more about the different steps that they could take in order to start improving their cybersecurity posture?
Definitely. As you know, there's no silver magic bullet, but the thing I like to lead with is a really big deal all by itself, and that is that you should have MFA turned on everything. And it's important to know that if you have something set up with MFA, that does not make it hacker proof, but holy cow, does it make it a lot harder to have a problem. And in most circumstances, it's a free or a low cost thing to implement. Some folks are comfortable doing that on their own. And if you are, by all means do it. But there's nothing you shouldn't have MFA turned on for. It's the ultimate initial, bouncer at the door that's keeping bad things from bouncing around in there. And there's other things you can do too. But, MFA is, I mean, just to be frank, it's effective, it's cheap or free, and it's easy to implement. So we recommend doing it everywhere. I've got a neighbor where I live where he works for Microsoft, and we were at a barbecue one day, and he was talking to me about how he thought the license plates on our cars are kind of funny. We have hilarious, like, personalized license plates, and he said, if I got a personalized license plate, it would be use MFA. I'm like, there you go. That's how important that is. Even the Microsoft guys saying it. So, which, by the way, I might beat him to the punch, and our next vehicle might say use MFA on it. But if anybody here is from Maryland, I called it first. But,
very true.
Oh yeah, no doubt. Dibs on use MFA. So after that, because you can't stop there, it's just a really good place to start. You need to update your stuff. So we've all, been on our Windows or our Macs, and we see a little notification that there's an update that needs to be implemented or something like that. And the vast majority of folks are like, I don't have time for this, you know what I mean? And before you know it, it's 2 weeks later, and they haven't done anything about this update. Well, it's important to understand what an update is. In almost every circumstance, it's basically Microsoft or Apple or Adobe or whoever it is saying, hey, we found a security hole that we think is a big deal, and we need to plug this security hole. Hence this patch. And it's good that software vendors are trying to keep us safe, but when they do that, the bad guys are like, oh, oh my goodness, what hole are we patching here? So they're almost drawing attention to the problem in a lot of cases, which only hastens the need to make sure that you apply these patches. Now, you got to do it carefully because patches can break things. We have a pretty sophisticated way we handle patching where essentially we try the patches out and then roll them out. So you know it's kind of the best of both worlds. It's probably not going to take you down, but you're protected. You know, years ago, Rick, FedEx got taken down by a worm that Microsoft had patched 4 months earlier. So that means that FedEx was at least 4 months behind on their patching. And you know, FedEx is a big company with a fairly substantial IT budget. But I guarantee you their internal IT staff was terrified, ironically, of applying a patch that would take their systems down. And that's exactly what happened because they didn't patch it. And they were down for, I want to say it was close to a week, which I couldn't even tell you how much money that cost FedEx, but that must have been a nightmare. So the only people I've ever met that get excited about patching, like me, are IT people. But it's really important. I mean, there's a reason why these things, you know, are popping up on your desk. Some other high level things that you should pay attention to is training your team. You could have the best, say, network security in the world, but if Karen's clicking on fake DocuSign links and giving up her credentials to stuff, you're officially a sitting duck. So it's really important that there's like continual awareness. We do things like simulated phishing training and just general cybersecurity training because most folks are just not wired for that. One of the reasons, or one of the things I like about the simulated phishing stuff is it's a little bit like if you take a dummy video camera and you have it trained on the cash register at the store. All of a sudden, the cash is always right at the end of the day in that cash register, you know? So we tell our clients if they end up doing like some simulated phishing stuff, it's really kind of your prerogative if you want to tell your employees you're doing it or not. But I recommend telling them because they're going to start paying attention. They don't want to be that lone employee in the Monday morning meeting that's like, yeah, well, guess who clicked on the DHL link again? You know what I mean? So they're probably not going to click on legitimate things, but if you had to move the needle, you'd rather have a little too much of that than a little too much of the bad clicking. So you know, people sleep on training and simulated phishing, but it's super important. You've heard the expression, chains only as strong as its weakest link. That's almost always human beings. So that's really important. And another thing that I always preach, I think it's just super important, is you got to have really good backups. You just do. Things happen. You know, human beings delete things by accident. Certainly IT, you know, snafus cause problems, but, you know, ultimately a lot of these bad guys, they want to take your data and either charge you to get it back and or charge you to not release it publicly, you know, and if you have good backups, you can at least completely shield yourself from a ransomware attack, you know, because you have your data. So every time you hear about, you know, some sort of data breach and people paying ransoms, that's a very fast and easy way of saying they either didn't have backups or they had crappy ones. Because, you know, what was it, Baltimore? I think it was Baltimore City had a cyber attack a few years ago, and
yes, they did.
I think they paid the fee, you know,
They did.
and you know, and similarly, Anne Arundel County had some sort of a similar type of attack not too long ago, but they had good backups. And they told the bad guys to go pound sand. And, you know, and if we all told the bad guys to go pound sand, there wouldn't be bad guys anymore, you know? So I really applaud what Anne Arundel County did because that was, A, they had a better posture, but also like we got to stop paying these folks. I mean, it is a real business model. It really is. And almost anybody can get started with it, which is terrifying.
Yeah, and it's no longer, you know, we always sort of did the generalization of the person sitting in a parent's basement at a computer trying to play around and not have to get a real job. But I mean, they're sophisticated outfits these days. It's anywhere from nation states to like these call centers in, other countries or even here throughout the country where, I mean, they're sophisticated businesses because they know that they're going to rack up that money that people are going to pay because they don't realize that there's another way to do it.
Exactly. You know what a lot of bad guys do, which is just kind of speaks to the level of sophistication, is they'll infiltrate a system, and then they'll start looking for insurance policy documents. And they're like, oh, they have cyber liability insurance. Oh, they pay ransoms up to $1 million with this policy. Guess what we're going to ask for? So you don't get me wrong, you need to have cyber liability insurance, but they're getting so sophisticated, they're actually trying to confirm you have it, and make sure you've got the money, which is terrifying. I mean, like you said, Rick, these are like, I don't want to call them legit businesses because they're horrible human beings, but they are organizations, and they got call centers. I mean, they can be fairly sophisticated because there's a lot of money at stake. So
Yeah.
Don't underestimate the bad guys, folks. I mean, you even got, you mentioned nation states, those oftentimes are the scariest of all because they tend to have fairly large resources at their disposal. North Korea, in part to get around a lot of their sanctions, they actively extort businesses for money. They're just like little gangsters running around, and they're funding some of their military operations on this terrorism, basically, which is crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, you don't know what you don't know, and people don't realize that sort of thing. And but you've really touched upon a bunch of stuff here that, again, we hope we're not trying to scare you. We're not trying to beat you over the head with things. We're just trying to let you know the lay of the land. But again, it's that preparation, and it's taking the time and understanding what things are going to do. When you're updating your Google Chrome, you're not going to lose everything if Google Chrome updates. You're just going to make your system more secure. But again, when you, like you said, if you're like FedEx, 4 months later, you still haven't put the patch in place, well, then you're probably within 4 months how many patches behind. And when it's trying to do all of that to a system, yeah, that's when you can cause problems. So I think it's really about, again, doing these things often and doing them as soon as you can to try to minimize any problems.
Yeah, totally agreed. Yeah, you have to. The stakes are entirely too high.
So now I'm going to show my age a little bit because I'm going to go back to the days. Do you remember the show, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire?
Mm-hmm. Regis.
All right. Yeah, I see. And I do. I remember the Regis Philbin one. I'm pretty sure it's still on a game show network somewhere or a network and someone else is hosting, but I remember the Regis Philbin days. But that was always the big thing. Do you want to phone a friend? When is it time for somebody who owns a small and mid-sized business to phone a friend, to try to bring in someone who knows more about this stuff than they do? For instance, like your folks at Cheaper Than a Geek.
Yeah, for sure. There's power in outsourcing stuff. I'm not just a chief nerd. I started this company, so I'm also a business owner and can, speak business owner language. And if there's one thing that I have done over and over again, it took me forever to learn, was when I would first outsource something. So I'm like, these contracts are getting a little wordy. I don't know if they're right. I should probably have a lawyer look at it, And then after that, I'm like, I probably should have done that years ago, or first time I hired a CPA I was like, oh, wow. Okay. This is great. I should have done this years ago. So typically, if you folks are like me, it might not necessarily be like, oh my God, I can't wait to spend my money on IT. Where do I go? But like oftentimes it can make sense to get a pro involved. I've had this experience firsthand several times. But as far as like determining, when you've hit that tipping point, certainly if cybersecurity becomes a stress instead of a strategy, I mean, that's certainly one indicator that you should probably get, a company like ours involved. If you're losing sleep over, do your backups work? If you're Googling, what does ransomware look like at 2 a.m, it's probably time to get, a legit company involved. Certainly with the CMMC stuff, you're pretty much required to, which is at the end of the day, good advice, really. Most of the time, businesses call us right after a scary incident, and we're able to help, but we could have really been much more impactful if we were involved before an incident. And you just got to be proactive. It was what it really comes down to. You don't hire an accountant after the IRS shows up. You know what I mean? You want to have a relationship with an accountant before that. When technology becomes a liability instead of an asset, it's time to get folks that live and breathe this stuff involved. That's what we do, obviously, but it's just there's a reason why we have experts in certain fields. I feel like I might understand some aspects of tax law better than a regular person, but if I started preparing people's tax returns, it would be bad for everybody. We all have our lanes,
Exactly. And we live in such a digital culture these days. So I always like to go back to memes, right? You've always seen those pages where people see the cake on Cake Boss, and oh, I could build that. I can create my own cake, and then they do that, and then they take a picture of it, and it looks nothing like that, or it looks like somebody was printing the picture out and they pulled the paper out too soon and it smeared it, and then they, you always have the nailed it, where it's really not that, or it's kind of like, plumbers, electricians, anybody else. Yeah, we all can go to Home Depot and grab stuff and think that we know what we're doing, but I'm the kind of guy who really wants to know that when I go to flip the light switch on after after the light switch has been changed out, that it's going to work. I'm not going to electrocute myself. There are times when it's something simple, and there are times when we sit there and say, "Oh my goodness, we really need to call in a pro." So it's and I think you've definitely hit the nail on the head when you say it's got to be that proactive posture.
Absolutely. I'm a car guy, but I don't change my own brakes. You know what I mean? Let me let a guy or gal who does that 12 times a day, every day, do that,
Yes. I always tell people I would like to find somebody ultimately more qualified than me to handle this sometimes when it comes to those certain jobs, because especially, brakes on your car. Yeah, I'm going to be driving 70 miles an hour on the interstate. I want to know that when I hit that brake pedal, it's going to have an effect and the car is going to stop. Otherwise, it's going to be challenging. Want to remind folks as we're going through this, if you have a question, please go ahead and post it right into the chat. We have our Project Spectrum team. They're going to be answering some things, but then we're also going to curate some questions to get Chris's take on it at the end of the webinar. So we're going to save 10, 15 minutes for that at the end. So Chris, I really want to get some more wisdom from the nerd side, okay? Because I have to think that over the years you've been in business, you've kind of seen it all. You talked about proactivity being a big shift that you'd like to see. What are some other mindset shifts that you wish small and medium businesses would make when it comes to cybersecurity?
Yeah, sure. So much of life is philosophy, and if you get the right philosophy driving something, then you're going to make the right decision. So if I could wave a magic Ethernet cable and change one thing, it would be to stop treating cybersecurity like a cost and start treating it like it's a core part of your business, because it is. I mean, and I practice what I preach. We have, as you might expect, fantastic security, and I don't, and it costs money. Even though we're in this space, it costs us money to do it too. But you have to have it. If you have an incident, it's almost certainly going to cost you a lot of money. It's almost certainly going to cost you a ton of productivity with you and your staff. You could lose a considerable amount of face. It could be a PR nightmare that you may not even come back from. We would be a good example of that. If we got compromised, who's going to want to work with us? Probably nobody. So you got, just the PR cost alone could put you right out of business. I feel like, too many small businesses think of security like insurance. It's something they'll deal with later if something goes wrong. And again, you need cyber insurance, but this is different than that. This is being proactive. You need a good security posture to even get cyber insurance these days anyway. But it's not a nice to have thing. It's the difference between running your business and rebuilding it from scratch is the kind of the way I look at it. Like I mentioned earlier, you wouldn't have a retail shop where you would leave the door open and unlock overnight. I mean, you'd be crazy to do that. But if you don't have like air gapped, incremental backups of your data somewhere, you're doing the same thing. The door is open at night, and you're hoping and praying that your tchotchkes are still there in the morning. Like you can't do that. You on a long enough timeline, you're guaranteed to have a problem, and it probably won't be a very, very big problem. So I would say security is not an expense; it's an investment, really, in survival. And when you treat it that way, it's not necessarily scary or overwhelming. It's just another smart move you do that protects your business, your customers, and your peace of mind.
And then, I think one of the other things that we want to pass along to people is that, you can have the greatest tools and that are available as far as cybersecurity goes, but tools don't fix people problems, right?
True story. I actually have a story around that, if you'll indulge me.
I always.
And I got lots of stories, but I'll only bust one or two out here, so I don't put everybody to sleep. So a little while back, we had a client that hit us up. Of course, it was 4:45 on a Friday afternoon, and they're like, "Hey, we got a big problem. The comptroller has been compromised." Like, okay, so we hopped to it, figured out what happened. We remediated the issue. We had everything wrapped up, ready to go, fixed, problem solved by 6 p.m., which is pretty darn good, and honestly, on a Friday, that's even better. So, so I thought we were heroes. We were heroes. But then comes the really uncomfortable conversation with the CEO. And basically, he was like, "Chris, we spend all this money with you folks every month for security. How could something like this happen?" And I said, "Well, it's simple. You could have all the security in the world, even more than you have right now. But we can't stop your comptroller from giving out her credentials." And that's what happened here, And then he was like, "Oh, was that the simulated phishing thing that you were talking about?" I was like, "Yeah, do you see why we need that now?" Because it all started with an email, like so many attacks do. And then his light bulb went off, and he's like, "Okay, I think we need this," because you do. It's honestly, everybody on my team is obviously very security oriented, very good with technology. I'd like to think they're good people too, but I put them through this stuff because you just can't be too careful, myself included. I've taken every exam that we have because well, you've heard you kind of pay it forward as a leader. I don't ask folks to do anything I wouldn't do. And yeah, I know technology. Yeah, I know cybersecurity, but you always learn a little something, and it's never a bad thing to be vigilant. Being vigilant is super duper important.
Yeah, I mean, what's that old saying? Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. Well, it's kind of the same when it comes to staying free from this stuff. But and that's the big challenge is human nature, because particularly when it comes to smaller businesses and you've got a small staff and you've got a small team and somebody new comes on board, or somebody's really trying to gun for a promotion. Those are prime targets for that social engineering, where all of a sudden you get an email that looks like it's from the CEO saying, "Oh my goodness, I'm locked out of my system. I need your username and password so we can hurry up and get this document sent over, and or I need you to buy 50 gift cards," or I mean, whatever else they're asking for, because they do that. They will prey upon somebody who is inexperienced, trying to make a name for themselves, trying to be the good person, trying to be the hero. We all want to have the S on our chest, and we all want to have the cape and blowing in the wind, and look heroic perched on top of the mountaintop or on top of the building. But a lot of times that's just not reality. And there are the bad actors or the threat actors that will just jump on that.
Unfortunately, yeah, it's a real thing. Yeah, you gotta be careful. You gotta be vigilant. It's like everything in life, man. You gotta pay attention.
Yeah, yeah. And you can't wait until it's too late.
Nope.
Anybody who goes to the dentist office and flosses in the parking lot, you know, they're gonna know. They immediately call you out on that and say, "Have you been flossing?" "Oh yeah, yeah, I've been flossing. Yeah, I could see you were flossing in the parking lot. Your gums are still bleeding, and there's still a pile of crud around the top of your teeth." So I don't want to hear about that. I'd really like to do something with you that I think is going to be kind of fun. I have to say you're a fantastic guest, and I hope we have you back on again because this has been great. But I'd like to do a little myth busting, if you don't mind. Mythbuster is one of my favorite shows.
Yeah, I love that show.
But I will say this: I cannot watch it live. I actually have to watch it because I like to keep fast forwarding so that I don't have to wait the entire hour for the little 4 or 5 minute segments that are going to bust the myth. I just want to get through it. But I want to throw out some stuff, and I want you to bust the myth. Okay. So, we talked about this before. Cybersecurity is only concerned for big companies.
Yeah, so many people think that, but if your operation runs on, touches, or transfers money, which would probably be every organization in the known universe, then you are a target, because that's what they want. They're after your money or just general chaos. Yeah, so cybersecurity is not a concern for just big companies. It's a concern for everybody. Whether you believe it or not, it's the truth.
No, definitely. Antivirus. I have Windows Defender. I have McAfee. I have, I don't even know if McAfee's a thing anymore. I have Malwarebytes. So I've got that installed. I've got it installed on all my people's machines. I'm good.
No,
No.
not at all. I mean, it's better than probably zero, but you're still in negative territory. Yeah, that's bad news because the attacks are getting sophisticated. So, well, first of all, if you have, let me back up even further. A lot of folks don't know how antivirus works, and it's really important to understand. So, to a computer, whether it's a Windows or a Mac, to a computer, a virus is just a program. It might as well be your resume in a Word document. That computers aren't smart enough to understand, oh, this thing is trying to, destroy stuff. Like they don't know that. So the way antivirus works is there's security researchers out there that will find this new virus, that's called resume 123. And once they determine it's a virus, they'll essentially, come up with what would be like the VIN number on a car for this piece of software. And then it'll push it down to your McAfee's, your Nortons, or whatever, and say, hey, if you see this, it's a virus, and stop it. Well, problem number one with that philosophy is that means that resume 123 was causing chaos for a while until somebody figured it out. So it called those 0-day attacks. So that, right away, there's a gap in coverage there. But there's even threats out there that will turn security stuff like this off. And then once it's a part of your operating system, it fires it back up. And now, poof, you got a problem and your Norton's never going to see it. So there's lots of reasons why we're not anti-antivirus. I would definitely be a fan of that being a part of the puzzle, but it doesn't do everything. If you're got an employee that is on the receiving end of a targeted phishing attack, and now they're clicking around stuff in websites, your AV may never see any of that, yet, in the example I gave, the comptroller just gave away the farm, thinking that she was just doing her job, and yeah, don't get too comfortable with, oh, I got Norton. That's like saying I got tires for my car, but I don't have the wheels and everything else yet. It's like, well, it's a part of the puzzle.
Or I got the cheapest tires available, so now I'm going to go drive in 6 feet of snow.
Exactly.
Or I'm going to take on the water crossing the roadway.
Mhm.
So I love this one, and I can't wait to hear what you say about this. Nobody's ever requested a ransom from me, so I know we've never been hacked.
I always fuzz out on the stats because there's a few different reporting entities out there, but there's something along the lines of like 89% of all businesses have been hacked. You just might not know it, and that's unfortunately very true. A lot of these attacks, they can be very long in nature. You could have an employee that got their email compromised unbeknownst to anybody, and the bad guys are just chilling. They're just watching the traffic. What does this company do? Oh, they facilitate settlements for real estate transactions. That's exciting. Oh, 123 Main Street's got a sale coming up, and now we're talking to the broker, and there needs to be money wired around, and and then they'll, and that could take a year. They could be camped out in your stuff for a year, doing all kinds of research. How do you communicate? Like, what's your tone like? And with AI, you can basically dump a bunch of data and say, I need to sound like that guy, and you will. And it's totally terrifying. And then some of the crazier attacks we've seen, and I'm sure you've seen some stuff like this, is the bad guys will hijack an existing legitimate email thread, and they'll say, hey, Rick, I know we talked about wiring that 250K over here, but we just found out from our accountant there's a limit at that bank. I need you to do it to this SunTrust one. And it's not a spoofed email. It's really from that person. And it's in an existing email chain where you got 14 things going back and forth. I mean, everybody trusts that because it seems very it is real. It's just the person on the other end of the keyboard is not who you thought it was. So, stuff like that, you could be compromised right now as you're watching this webinar, and they're just scooping up the dirt on you, and they're going to bury it with you later. And a lot of times they like to sneak in at, say, 6 p.m. on a Friday, have a 3-day weekend, and they can cause all kinds of chaos for 3 days, and you have no idea, So it's important that you operate with an abundance of caution, basically.
Yeah, and again, that all goes down to making sure that you're passing that messaging along, making sure that you're, multi-factor authentication is an interesting thing when you bring that up, because there's even a way to do that without MFA, whereas you send me an email, I'm going to call you and say, Chris, is this what you just asked me for?
Yep.
Because that seems a little out of the ordinary.
Exactly.
You're looking for my credit card number. You need me to buy some tickets to Jamaica, or this is a little strange, but
I would take those tickets.
I just, not meaning to get off on a tangent, but I just came back from a cruise where we went to Jamaica. Absolutely beautiful place. Absolutely beautiful. Highly recommend it. Highly recommending cruises too, but I'm not going to go off on that because we're gonna make sure we stick to this. So the one thing I want to make sure that we do is we give folks time to ask questions. So again, we've got a couple that we've gotten in that again I want to get your take on. Again, if you do have any other questions, please make sure that you're putting them into the chat, and we will make sure that Mark is moderating them and getting those over to me. So the first one. How do you handle data backups if you're managing ops data in a cloud app, aside from access control and, admin settings?
I hate to sound like a lawyer, but it depends. It depends on the environment and how it's all stitched together. It's important to point out that a lot of folks get an unrealistic level of feeling secure from things that are cloud-based. The reality, folks, is cloud means somebody else's computer. That's what it means. So it used to be all of us small businesses had our servers in the office. Now most of us have them in the cloud. It's still a server. It can still be attacked. It can still have problems. It can still go down. You shouldn't do anything different around data security just because it's no longer in your four walls. Like, if anything, it's more available for attacks because it's probably got a larger, attack surface. So, sorry, I got to be a little vague on this, but it depends on the environment. And what we tell a lot of our clients is, like, they might have, say, a CRM, a customer relation management tool, where they're like, and it could be a well-known one, and they're like, I don't see a way of exporting my data. Well, a lot of times these companies don't want to make that easy because that's what you would do if you were to leave them for a competitor, which is a little underhanded, but there's usually ways of getting your information out of something. And we're big fans of automating that as much as humanly possible, but you might get into a scenario with like a CRM where you just got to do it manually. That's the only way it's done. The vendor will begrudgingly show you how to do it. And then you got to put it somewhere, so you might download that data as like a comma separated value sheet, to your computer, but we're going to say, put it in this one folder over here, because then it'll get backed up, so not only do you have a copy, but that's being backed up. And don't get beholden to, well, my Office 365 is with Microsoft, and we think Microsoft knows what they're doing. Well, they do know what they're doing, but they're not hacker proof. And buried in that end user license agreement is, and we're not responsible for your data. And the only people that know that are the people that are having a really bad day because they're finding out afterwards.
Yeah, that would be an incredibly bad day for sure. Another one that I'm sure you're going to say it depends, but again, want to get your take on it. So if you have a small to medium business that is going to be in government contracting, what would you say would be sort of an average cost for implementing a basic but secure cloud environment that is going to meet those government contracting standards?
It depends. Sorry, but
That's okay.
Whatever the mandate is, like if you're talking about doing like a remote desktop, like Azure type of arrangement for something like that, we typically see that in the 150 to 250 per user range, depending on what you need. But there's a lot of back end stuff that goes into that. We don't do anything that's not in line with best practices around security for obvious reasons. But there's also high G and all that stuff. Like you gotta you could have a fairly secure setup on a regular Azure instance, and have that exact same setup on like a high G instance, but because of all the backend stuff, it's different, and if you're compliant required to have, say, a high G situation, you got to make sure that you're doing that. So a lot of it, and you could boil CMMC down to this too. It's what do we need to do? In a perfect world, we all have unlimited budgets and you would just do everything. But oftentimes you do got to be a little choosy. And, if you're a sub on a prime contract and they're saying, hey, you have to have these controls. Well, it's not because they're telling jokes. Like you have to have these controls or you're not going to have that revenue stream anymore. So it's important to understand, what's really being asked of you.
Absolutely. Another question that came in. So you mentioned that you've run phishing campaigns with your team. Wondering what software or platform did you use for those simulations?
Oh, sure. There's a few of them out there. They pretty much exclusively work with MSPs, managed service providers like us. One of the ones we like to use is a product called CyberGuard. There are several good ones out there. A lot of times, you could get into a scenario where most folks maybe have heard of No before, but and not to pick on them because I'm sure they're a good outfit, but they don't want to talk to you if you're like less than 100 employees. Like for them, it's just a financial thing. We always recommend that you have a talented IT provider involved in the process. There's a lot of pitfalls you have to worry about. The simulated phishing stuff is fantastic, but if the users aren't getting the emails because your spam filter actually was doing its job, then that's not going to work. So you have to poke holes in the spam filter. Basically, they call it whitelisting for those certain domains it's coming from and stuff like that. But there's management involved, especially at the beginning stages, to make sure that it's successful. You got to make sure people are paying attention to it. It's not enough that these emails go out and people are or are not clicking on them. You have to do something with this information. So even if it's in the Monday morning meeting to say, hey, we're doing about 2 of these a month and everybody passed last time. And we just wanted to say thank you for keeping us safe from hackers. It's
Excellent.
Yeah.
No, excellent information. Another question that's come in. Can you share a little bit more about VDIs, which I'm guessing it's the virtual desktops, and how do you leverage those so company data is secure and not stored locally on any assets? Do you have any checklist or criteria to follow on selecting a VDI?
Uh, no, I don't have anything we could give out, or I would, but it sounds like whoever's asking that question knows a lot about what they're talking about. So it's really critical. I guess you could make this case about everything, but you have to have it configured properly. So if your concern is, okay, we have access to semi-classified information, obviously that can't go anywhere. You got to make sure it can't go anywhere, like, and there needs to be auditing. You need to have good people too, but like, it really comes down to auditing and configuration setup and making sure that that's right.
Excellent. Yeah. And again, when it comes to anything virtual, having those tools are wonderful. Having the firewalls, having the antivirus, it's all wonderful, but these sophisticated threat actors know all that stuff. You're not pulling the wool over their eyes. You're not using anything that they don't know about and don't know how to circumvent, right?
Exactly. Yep. That's a good way to put it, Rick.
No, and that's always the case. So it's always again about having that diligence and making sure that we're getting there. So I'm going to go with one more question. Can you recommend a cybersecurity roadmap that is tailored to different stages of company growth? So like you're starting from a solo entrepreneur, then you go to a small team of 5, then 10 to 20 employees and beyond. I mean, is that the type of thing that you work with the companies that you help?
Yeah, we do. I wish I could tell you, it's, yeah, you just got it. There's a framework that addresses that specifically, but the reality is that's not the case. It's almost like, what's your favorite color, or, what's the best car to drive? Like, it's really kind of a personal call. How much control do you want to have? What do you worry about? We have, it's the exception, not the norm, but we have clients that really, truly don't care if their data gets leaked because it's just not important. You'll never hear the CPA firms say that because, they got tax records and social security numbers and banking information. They're obviously very concerned. And I feel like most companies, if nothing else, have some internal secrets that they don't necessarily want public, and they certainly wouldn't want their customer list shared. But it's really a matter of the easy way to do it is you pick a standard that most applies to you. And then you look at the cost and complication on implementing all the pieces of it. You figure out what you have to do. That's kind of out, not for discussion. You got to do this if you want to keep, if you want to stay the sub on a prime contract. But then everything else is now debatable. Can you live with if this went sideways? If the answer is yes, maybe you shouldn't throw money at that. But if the answer is no, then you start to get into the nuances of how difficult is it to implement. Are there stopgap ways of potentially getting most of the way there? A lot of times, security is a million different parts and pieces of stuff, but and we all want 100% security. But a lot of times, if we can get a client to 90 to 95% secure, I mean, they're in a good place. They're in a very good place. And, it might take you, let's just say $2,000 to get to 90%, but to go from 90 to 100 might be another 50, because it's just a whole nother level. And I mean, we're all typically running for-profit entities out here. So you need to make sure that there's cash in the bank to do what you want to do. So sometimes you got to be choosy. And that's where we come in. We kind of hold ourselves out as like almost like a virtual chief information officer. Give us the concerns, give us the problems, the regulations, and then we'll say, okay, if you do this, this will happen. If you do that, that'll happen. We would recommend going this way. Here's why, and then ultimately you just make an informed decision.
No, that's fantastic. Well, we are closing in on the end of this leg of the cyber journey. I have to say that hopefully anybody who's come into this webinar at -4, we hope you're leaving at least at 0. maybe one half. I would say that's progress, right? So again, huge thanks to Chris Barber, Chief Nerd, and I'm going to go ahead and name you our professional cyber superhero. I'm going to give you the S, and I'm going to give you the cape, and have you stand on top of the tall building. But Chris, cheaper than a geek. We appreciate all of the insight, even the horror stories, and all of the reality checks. And you delivered it with just the right amount of flair. So again, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was awesome.
Yeah, again, I really do hope that we have you back. And again, if there's one thing that we hope everybody's learned today, it's this: cybersecurity, again, is not optional. If you've got data, devices, or even just a decent internet connection, you're already in the game. The only question is whether you're playing defense. So get that MFA tuned up, test your backups, make sure your team knows what a phishing scam is, and even the small steps can really add up fast in cyberspace. Now, a reminder to everybody, we're going to send out the replay of today's session. It's going to be posted on the Project Spectrum YouTube page. We do want to let everybody know that if you want to reach out to us, you've got a couple of different ways to do that. You can connect with us on projectspectrum.io, especially going down to that virtual help desk. That's that little question mark over in the corner of the website. So you can head there and you can send us a message and we will get back to you. You can email us the old-fashioned way, support@projectspectrum.io. Keep your eye out for additional training webinars like this one. And of course, follow us on social media, look for the YouTube channel, and look for our LinkedIn page. So again, thanks so much. Chris, we really do appreciate it. And again, I do hope that we have you back, because I think there's a lot more stories that we can tell.
Absolutely, man. I'd love to. Love getting nerdy with you, sir.
Fantastic. Anytime. I'm going to have to get my own glasses next time.
Thank you, Rick. And thank you, Chris. Once again, I just wanted to jump in here to remind folks that our next iteration, we're tracking for August the 21st. Tentatively listed as cyber resilience. That's our next cyber circuit there. But that aside, again, I want to thank you thank you so much, Chris. And again, just remind folks that Project Spectrum is there to help. Okay, I know some of what we discussed today sounds daunting, and it could be very challenging and stressful for folks. So we want to make sure that we're letting you know that we're here to help you out, not only with online training specifically for cybersecurity, hygiene, and compliance. Obviously, CMMC certainly have some preparatory tools there as well, self-assessment, scoping guidance, and much more. So I want to just let you know that those resources avail themselves. And again, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to our team. We are very closely connected, obviously, with DoD, Office of Small Business Programs, as well as DoD CIO. And so we understand and are synthesizing some of the latest guidance as it becomes available. So again, an invaluable resource. If you've not already registered, please do that right away today. And we look forward to being able to engage with you in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Kareem. We appreciate you. And thanks again to everybody for joining us today and hanging with us through the hour. We went a little bit over, but I'll tell you what, I wouldn't take back a single second of any of the information we shared today. So again, if you have further questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Look for our next webinar, and we look forward to talking to you again next month. Until then, we wish you the very best of success in your cybersecurity journey. Have a safe and resilient day.